Hi, Shalom Chaverim. I'm speaking to you in the middle of Hanukkah, it's the middle of December, and where I live, it's actually quite chilly. Yeah, at night, it's the low 50s, 40s, but I say chilly, not cold, because I grew up in New York, and I remember we had like sort of an unwritten definition. Cold is when it gets less than 32 degrees Fahrenheit. You see, when rain turns to snow, water to ice, breath to frost, then it's very cold. But until then, it's merely very chilly outside or windy. I talked to you about cold and about rain turning into snow because I actually think that there's a very important lesson that we could learn from the idea of rain and then snow, or water and then ice. Yeah, let me explain. When I was a student, I had a teacher, I had a student that loved to juggle. And he was actually quite disruptive sometimes in class. And I one time said to him, will you stop juggling? I mean, you can't live your life juggling. You got to study a little bit. And he said, teacher, I could juggle. In fact, I could do the impossible. I could juggle water. And I looked at the kid and I said, no, you can't juggle water. No one can juggle water. And he said, yes, I can. And I challenged him. He said, okay, I'll juggle water tomorrow. The next day, he came to class and he opened up a bag. It was a paper bag. And he said, are you ready to watch me juggle water? And I said, yeah, sure. If you have water in the paper bag, I'd love to see you juggle it. And he took out some ice cubes and began to juggle. Now, he was creative. I mean, ice cube, after all, is frozen water. So he did juggle water, and I never told him it has to be fluid, so technically he got away with it. When you think about the difference between ice and water, I'm sure there's a lot of science behind it, but I would like to talk philosophically about the differences between the two and make some observations. You put something into water, it dissolves. It's the universal solvent is water. You freeze something, it gets preserved. Isn't it funny? It's the same water. But when it's in a fluid motion and it's liquid, it can actually make something disappear because it creates movement. Whereas when the water stops moving and it is frozen, then whatever is there stays the way it is, actually. Which is great for dead fish, but not very good for live people. You're much better off in a swimming pool than in a frozen block of ice. The Torah is actually compared to water. One of the reasons why the Talmud offers this comparison points out that water starts from some mountaintop somewhere and it flows downwards. And there could be hundreds, maybe even thousands of miles that separate the origin from the destination. But ultimately it's all the same water. And it flows downwards. So the Talmud tells us that water teaches us humility. Number one, on a very practical level, if you're thirsty, anyone can bring you a glass of water, even a kid, even someone that's mentally your inferior, even a person who doesn't have your talents. Because after all, you're thirsty and a glass of water tastes the same, whether it's being presented to you by a 5-year-old or by a rich man. No difference. The water is the same. Not only that, but water as godly knowledge, it needs a sense of humility. You have to open yourself up to allow the Torah to enter you. If you're a big shot, or you think you know it all, or you're smarter than God Almighty Himself, then certainly the Torah will not be able to enter. But the more humble you become and realize how much you need inspiration and knowledge and enlightenment, that correspondingly will allow the Torah to affect you. Now imagine if the Torah is going to be presented to you as ice, frozen water. Someone says, come, let me teach you Torah. And you hear something which is rigid, it is cold, it's lifeless basically. It will not have that much of an effect on you. Because in order for Torah to have an effect on a person, the Torah has to be alive. It cannot be cold. It has to be warm. It cannot be immobile. It has to be able to move. It has to not preserve you. It has to transform you. Of course, how do we get to study Torah in that way? Well, for that we have a lifetime of work, and primarily being affected by the teaching of mysticism, Kabbalah, Chassidut. These are insights into Torah that keeps the Torah alive for us. So the Torah is God's wisdom. It's God's will. But you must receive the Torah and also be privileged to convey Torah when Torah is in the water form, not when it is, God forbid, frozen. I'll conclude with a charming story from a great mystic, the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov taught his students that whatever a person sees or hears could be understood as a lesson or as an instruction to serve God. And he surrounded himself with a very, very high level caliber of students, very, very pious and learned people. The story goes that one time they were on their way to their master, the holy Baal Shem Tov. It was in the midst of the winter. This is somewhere perhaps in the Ukraine. And they were passing a pond which was frozen. And there were people ice skating on the pond. And then they noticed that some peasants were carving into the ice a decoration. So the students stopped for a moment to see what kind of a decoration were they carving into it. And they were very surprised. They saw that they were actually carving into the ice the figure of a cross. They were very devout peasants, very devout people living there, and they wanted to have a cross on the ice. But it affected the students profoundly, because after all, we know that water is Torah. How is it possible that on water you should be able to have a figure of something which is really diametrically opposed to the oneness of God and to the holiness of His Torah? So they came to the Baal Shem Tov and they said, Rebbe, whatever we see is a lesson. What are we supposed to learn from this? And the Baal Shem Tov said, it's quite obvious. Torah is water. Water is Torah, but only if it is in a fluid state. If you take Torah and you study it in a cold way, in a manner which you don't allow it to affect you, if anything, it preserves you from changing, and you use the Torah to support that you know it all. You're already as pious as you could be. You're already as religious as could be. You're already as perfect as could be. Then, instead of getting closer to God, you actually create an obstacle. You're making an obstruction between you and God. You're making yourself into an idol. You're becoming a cross. So, my friend, there's a lot more to water than we think. There's water and water, frozen water and fluid water. Torah is fluid. Life is warmth, not cold. Let's hope and pray that we take inspiration from Torah to be alive and to enliven others. And by doing so, we will melt some of the icy indifference of this world to make this a more beautiful and holy world. Thank you.